welcome to 2021, and this is Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, so we are live with Bold Leaders in Learning. I'm Brandon Busteed, President of University Partners at Kaplan, and if you've joined us in the past year, you'll know this is going to be a little bit of a different session. Instead of interviewing a guest, I've actually got my colleague, Dan Strafford, who has been our producer for Bold Leaders in Learning, joining me today for a conversation. And we're going to talk through an article that I wrote earlier this week in Forbes about the 21 most important statistics that I think higher education leaders need to know as they enter this year, 2021. So that's our plan. Dan, you've been with me all year, but welcome to the front office, as they say.
I appreciate it. Yeah, good to be on this side of the glass, as it were. Brandon, one of the things I noticed in producing over the past year, one, I think we're going to see a lot of blackjack references with 21. We're going to see that happen throughout the year in multiple different prediction articles. But I've noticed you are very statistically driven, right? You are data driven. Obviously, past career stops have been about polling and data. Why is 21 data points here or data overall so important to you in projecting where you think higher education is going and where it needs to go?
Thanks for the question. It's kind of a fun one to answer. I mean, for whatever reason, I've always been interested in data, statistics, information, input. I just kind of soak it up. So that's certainly been a natural instinct and interest that I've had. But I think, more specifically as it relates to education, in the work that I've been leading here at Kaplan and then previously when I was at Gallup, I'll go with one of George Gallup's famous expressions where he talked about, if democracy is supposed to be based on the will of the people, then somebody ought to figure out what that will is. And I think about that in education through the lens of, if education is supposed to be about students, for example, we ought to figure out what that student will is. Or we could think about that through the lens of teachers and faculty, right? So when I think about the incredible and important stakeholders that exist around the education space, whether we're talking about teachers, faculty, students, parents, right? It's really important to understand what's on their minds, what their needs are, what they think the opportunities are. And I think, quite honestly, that a lot of education leaders don't pay careful enough attention to their various constituents and how they're feeling about things. So that's one of the reasons why I've been really passionate about it. And let's face it, if you're not data informed and data driven, that's a pretty difficult place to be in terms of trying to convince people to move in new directions. So for me, I love the combination of well-informed data or statistics, stories that kind of draw that data into a special light for people, and quite frankly, ideas that are a derivative of what you're learning from the data. So it's the combination of those things where I really love to spend my time.
Makes a lot of sense. And I do want to encourage anyone who has questions during this session, feel free to drop them in the LinkedIn chat or over on YouTube chat. Brandon also is available over on LinkedIn. You can follow him. You can send a request. Happy to talk to different people about these topics. We'll also see throughout here, we're going to get to the 21 points. Some are coupled or there are three that slides might go by quicker, or points that are tied together. Some are broader topics that we'll dive into a little bit deeper, but you can check out that Forbes article. The link will be in the comment section as well for you to check out, read, and obviously, Brandon, you have a pretty vast thread on this one already over on LinkedIn, people commenting, sharing their thoughts, sharing articles they've written, which seems to be a real key, I think. Before we get into about the community over on LinkedIn, you're getting a lot of feedback, right? You're getting a lot of people giving you different ideas, different ways to look at things, and people were reaching out saying, yeah, I agree, here's more on it. Is that a fair and accurate, way to look at how your LinkedIn community has really come together?
Yeah. The one kind of social media community where I've really invested my time. I put very little effort into things like Twitter or Facebook, but LinkedIn has been incredibly valuable because it has generated real connections, real conversations. And in the year that we've just had and are continuing to have, linked to the challenges of the pandemic, honestly, LinkedIn has replaced conferences for me. It's replaced salon dinners. It's replaced a number of things that, just aren't happening anymore. And I honestly feel like, I have an opportunity to meet new people on LinkedIn on a daily basis. They engage in really thoughtful dialogue and conversation with me and vice versa. And so I find it to be an incredibly engaging and also, a lifelong learning kind of platform in terms of what's happening there. So yeah, absolutely, huge fan of what LinkedIn has done, and just grateful that there are so many people who are thoughtfully engaging in a platform, especially in this day and age. It's hard not to be distracted by all that's going on here in Washington, D.C. I live in Vienna, Virginia, just outside the town. But to look at the LinkedIn community and how it has behaved, I mean, it is an incredibly fascinating story, and I think of great value to everybody who's plugged in here right now.
Well, let's dive in. I don't want to belabor the beginning here, but we have 21 data points. It starts off with really the context of it all, right? What we have as our past and our current state of where education has been and where it will be going over the next few years, right?
I know some people are probably familiar with some of these data points. Others might be new, but here's an example of one that we most people have been aware that higher education enrollments have been on the decline recently. We've now hit 10 consecutive years of declining enrollments in U.S. higher education. It's a decade, Dan. And then, the forecast for next year looks like it will be another decline. This is based on, lower numbers of students filling out the FAFSA, et cetera, right? So there's not a great prediction for next year. And then, of course, just around the corner is this population age demographic cliff that is going to happen starting roughly around 2025, where the percentage of 18-year-olds in the U.S., the raw number of 18-year-olds is going to be on a decline. So, I mean, we could be looking at 20 consecutive years of enrollment declines in U.S. higher education. We'll see how it plays out, but the fact that we're already a decade into this is certainly an interesting warning sign in terms of the strength of higher education right now. For the most part, Americans have greatly valued higher education. Okay, so that's the good news story. And if you look at the overall percentages, vast majority still do. But you take a look at the last 6 or 7 years, for example, and you look specifically at the indicators of the degree to which young adults, for example, say that college is something that's very important for them to achieve, or it's an important thing for somebody to achieve. And the importance of college as it was defined has dropped almost 50% in the last 6 years among 18 to 24-year-olds. So, there's a lot going on. There's other stats that are linked to this, like the next one, where you look at, high school students and, you ask them questions about, the importance of college, other things. The one I found really interesting was a statement about the degree to which they believe U.S. colleges and universities are the best in the world. Now, most people around the world would say that our U.S. higher education system is the best in the world. You look at our own U.S. high school students, and a sliver of them, 7%, strongly believe that the U.S. has the best colleges and universities in the world. I mean, these are things that start to give you an idea of the crumbling confidence in higher education, and it's coming from various angles, and it's being driven by a number of different forces, but definitely something that as a proponent of U.S. higher education, and those who are on this live, who I'm sure are as well, these are troubling things to wrestle with.
Don't forget, you can leave comments here, questions that you're interested in hearing the answer to in the comment section. Feel free to drop that in so we can answer them here live, or Brandon can get back to you after this live stream is finished. Do you have a take on why that percent? You said there's a lot feeding into it, but is it a marketing problem for U.S. Universities? It's just simply students not being well informed. Do you have a take on why that is the case at present? I think, Brandon, unfortunately, your audio is cut out for me, not hearing your microphone at present. The year of the you're on mute, or I don't hear your audio, continues here in 2021. But we will get that right and make sure we continue on here on bold leaders in learning. Leave those comments down below. Make sure to follow Brandon over on LinkedIn as well. Brandon Busteed, of course, as we talk through his 21 stats for 2021 in higher education here on our live stream. This one
through now?
Yep, we got you loud and clear now. So your take on the 7%. What is there something that you would point to as the major factor behind that?
Yeah, I was saying most of the stats we're going to run through next are going to go deep on kind of the one big issue that I think is driving this decline in confidence in higher ed, which is the lack of belief in the work readiness of graduates and lack of relevance in what's being taught or what people believe is being taught. But of course, compounding this are things like the rising cost of higher education. Tuition has gone up some 400% since the early 80s. So that is definitely part of the potent mix. And then, as some of you have been tracking, right, there's now partisan views on the value of higher education, where Republicans in the last 5, 6, 7 years, even predating the Trump administration, right, a lot of people think it was linked more to Trump coming in office. There was growing negativity and a growing divide between Republicans' views and Democrats' views of higher ed in the years before that. And, so now in many ways, you can say higher education is being looked at as a partisan issue. So we've got politics involved, we've got cost involved, and we've got this really big issue of work readiness, doubts of work readiness. So we'll expand on that more with the other stats we share.
Yeah, let's go to that next one. The number one reason here, value higher education.
Yeah, so this is really important for everybody to understand, and what it doesn't say is that this is the only reason why people value higher education. There are many reasons why we writ large value higher education, but the number one reason, far and away, there isn't even a close second place, is to get a good or better job, right? It is a work outcome, a career outcome motivated reason for why Americans value higher education. And, look, we value it because it can help us become more engaged citizens and, to instill a sense of lifelong learning, to be broadly educated, right? There's a lot of other things that are in the mix there. But when you look down that list, they're far, far down the list compared to the overarching number one reason, which is a job motivated reason. So, you go to this skepticism about college graduates being prepared for work. We'll share some of those stats, but it ladders up to the fact that this is the number one reason why we value it. If we're not delivering on this thing that people value most, that is going to erode confidence in higher education. That's exactly what has happened.
All right, let's continue moving here as the conversation goes on. We got to get through 21 in about 17 minutes or so. So we have a few to pile through here. This is a factor that I had not, until we started doing the show and I started reading more and more about the some college but no degree. Like they're not the benefit of the full degree and what that brings with it. This is a huge number of people that I was not aware of. How much does this weigh on the current higher ed process and the hiring process for businesses?
Yeah, first, it's a big number, as you noted, Dan. There's a lot of people that have had experience with higher education, gotten some credits along the way towards a degree and never finished. And there's a whole host of reasons why that happened. One of the ones we don't talk much about is that they just had a poor, and I'm going to say it, customer experience, right? Or let's just call it a poor student experience. A lot of these folks who have some college, no degree, the theory was, hey, they've got some credits, so they're the most likely ones that if I'm a college or university, I can encourage to come back and finish their degree because they're already some ways along the path. The reality is when you survey folks in this population who have some college, no degree, they're the least likely to say that they might re-enroll in higher education. And for a good portion of them, sure, life issues happened, right? There were real reasons why they dropped out, some of which, might have been some of their own personal challenges. But for a good chunk of them, they just didn't have an experience that they thought was relevant, that was worthwhile to what they were investing and spending. So, that's the part we don't talk about in this crowd, is there's a lot of folks out there that had a bum experience with higher education.
Makes a lot of sense. And you said customer service, and we don't like to necessarily call students customers, but you've thought very hard and long about how that is presented from the university side, from the marketing side for all of these universities, and brings to light a lot of the way we treat students and treat college students over the years here in the United States. Confidence is eroding, though, as well, right? Confidence in the worth and the cost of what we're doing for higher ed.
Yeah, so I mentioned these things earlier, but these data points give you, a recent look between just in the last year since 2019, right? The percent who believe education is going to be worth the cost and who think it's going to help them get a job, the number one reason why they value it, has dropped significantly, right? 77 to 59%, 89 to 64 respectively. So certainly unwinding on that front.
As we continue discussing the deck here, and remember, you can check out the Forbes article. You can follow Brandon over on LinkedIn. Leave your questions below if you have any. Happy to do one. Actually, we have one in from Robert. Do we think shrinking confidence in higher education shifted after the Great Recession? Confidence in for-profit education is the question here.
Yeah, so it's a good question. When did the erosion in confidence really begin? And look, I wish there were surveys that had been running for 50, 60 years to really track the long haul in this. It looks like a lot of it though started in the last 6, 7, 8 years. So it's recent, and it wasn't necessarily connected to the economic downturn of 2008, 2009. But if you look at the enrollments in higher education, our peak was in about 2011. And since 2011, we've shed more than 2.5 million students worth of enrollments in the US. That gives you an idea, raw number, 2.5 million fewer college students today than we had in 2011. I think a lot of it, Dan, starts to get into the framework of the increasing costs and awareness of that among the public, the increasing amounts of student loan debt, right, where we hit 1.6 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, was compounded with parents and students who were starting to ask tougher and tougher questions about the return on their investment. I know everybody likes to talk about ROI or ROEI, return on education investment, but this is something that is very much in parents' minds and prospective students' minds. They're thinking about, hey, if I'm going to have to spend this much money, make this kind of investment and sacrifice, I want to make sure I get something out of it, and I'm going to measure that by how good a job I get and how much money I'm making and certain things like that. I don't think that's the only way we should measure higher education, certainly.
Right.
But then on top of it, right, you've had these other forces where we've started to make higher education a political ball that we've been batting back and forth. And I'll just give you simple examples of this. The term liberal arts education, right? It's something that a lot of institutions put out as their defining way in which they teach, right? Their pedagogy. And a lot of us on this discussion are probably big fans of the liberal arts, graduates of the liberal arts. Here's just a simple point. When you ask people about whether liberal arts education leads to a good job, most people don't think it does. In fact, they put a liberal arts degree below no college at all when you ask them what will lead to a good job, which is just hard to fathom. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people understand that the term liberal arts used here doesn't mean liberal as in politically liberal,
right.
But unfortunately, it gets caught up in that kind of misinterpretation. And so we've got all kinds of things going on here, including a lot of negative rhetoric that is coming out from a kind of political perspective. So I think it's that mixed bag of elements that has really driven it. But most of the numbers in terms of decline in confidence in higher ed can be linked back to about 2012, 2013, and beyond.
All right, we're continuing on here on the 21 points, and I don't know this needs a ton of time, but today's young adults are the least working generation in U.S. history. Why is that a problem? Like, why is that a key right now for building this generation into the workforce that will be for tomorrow?
Yeah, it's simple. No one believes that college graduates or high school graduates are well prepared for the workplace. One of the reasons is they've never really worked, or very few of them relative to previous generations have worked in any kind of a job situation. So one of the things I think we've lost sight of that is going to, I think we're going to see a bit of a renaissance around is that we've lost sight of the value of learning from work, right? And if you think about viewing working situations as opportunities to learn and grow, then you start to say, hey, maybe we'll put more value on work. But I know a lot of well-intentioned parents who are encouraging their kids who can afford to not work to say, no, your job is to get good grades and higher
right.
test scores. And so I don't want you to work, instead of looking at working as an opportunity to learn, to understand what you do and don't like, to get it, So in short, right, how would we expect students to be well prepared for the workforce if they've had no work related experience? That could be an internship, a co-op, a job shadow, an apprenticeship. There's a lot of forms of it. but we are woefully inadequate when it comes to work experiences and work integrated learning experiences for students at all levels within our education system today.
It sounds like that, the idea that, well, I worked when I was in high school. I don't want you to have to work during high school because I'm trying to give you a better life, get more educated, but in fact, you're missing out on the training and the job skills that will help you get a better job. The next one, we're going to go through a few slides quickly here, or at least join them together because they're based off of one another. But the perception of institutions tying to the workforce and who thinks they're doing a good job and who maybe thinks they're not doing such a great job at all.
Yep. Yeah. So it's interesting. Almost every population that I was involved in surveying around their confidence in the work readiness of graduates or related questions are pretty negative about it, right? General population, only about 13% strongly agree college grads are ready for the workplace. Trustees of colleges and universities, of all the groups that I was ever involved in surveying, are the most negative, which is rather ironic, right? These are the folks that sit on the governing boards of colleges and universities, and they're the most negative about, how well, for example, their institution is doing in understanding what's needed in the job market, et cetera. On the next slide, though, Dan, as you mentioned, similar types of questions asked of provosts, the chief academic officers of colleges and universities, and they've got considerable confidence in how well they're doing preparing students for the workplace. So think of this dynamic. You've got the academic leaders of institutions who are like, yeah, we're doing pretty well, right? And you've got trustees who are like, yeah, we're clueless here. So there's even a lot of disagreement within critical leadership roles in the academy. And by the way, I'll point this out too. There are some real weaknesses in terms of what we're doing or not doing in terms of helping prepare students to be work ready. There's also big perception gaps, different language we use, different definitions of this. So to a provost, for example, their definition of work readiness is quite frankly different than the definition of work readiness that a C-level business executive might have. We're not even having conversations to dig into that. And so we've got this big perception gap, and then we've got a real, gap in terms of how effectively we're delivering on this for students. And there's a lot of data that supports that we're not doing a good job. So put the perceptions aside for a second. This one you have here, about a quarter of all folks who have experienced college in the United States in any form, a quarter will say that they think that what they learned in college is relevant to their work and their day-to-day life. You sit there and you think about that and you go, really? That's a real indicator that we are underperforming in terms of making sure that what's being taught is relevant. And oh, by the way, this isn't like get rid of the humanities or English and, philosophy majors. This is not the point.
Right.
Because in all these subjects, right, we have opportunities to show students how it can be relevant to their lives, how it could be relevant to any number of working opportunities. I just don't know that we're making those connections. So a quarter of folks who experience higher ed come out saying, yeah, I what I learned is relevant to my work or it's relevant to my day-to-day life. We've got to improve on that kind of indicator. If we do, as you can see, right, there are real benefits and payoffs to it. So those who do strongly agree that their education is relevant to their work and day-to-day life are more than 5 times likely to say their education was worth the cost. So if you're saying, hey, what is the driver of value for college, right? How do I make sure that students get their money's worth? Well, there's a pretty simple answer to that. It's about making sure that they feel like it was relevant to their work, it's relevant to their day-to-day life. They end up being 5 times more likely to say that was worth it. I'd do it over again. So that's a pretty big one.
We may run over a few minutes today, lots to get to, and I do have a question here. Is this simply, and I know nothing's simple here, but simply the idea of I'm going to major in mechanical engineering and then become a mechanical engineer versus someone who majors in something that may be more of a open-ended career path, someone who majors in history as I did, or someone who majors in something that has a less direct path to a career?
Well, when a graduate feels like what they studied is aligned to their career, that improves their likelihood they felt it was worth it. So yes, to some degree, Dan, it is about, I studied to be an engineer and now I am an engineer. But it's not as specific as that. Somebody could have been, I'll use an English major, right? But they ended up in a job where very clearly using the kinds of skills they were doing in college, right, where they clearly see the relevance of it. They had teachers who, had them be involved in long-term projects, and they had work integrated learning opportunities in school, and will hit the mark just as well as somebody who, studied for something and ended up specifically in that field. So it's very much about making connections as opposed to alignment between, the degree you studied and the exact role you're in right now.
Costs tied to alumni, right? That's something you've talked about a lot over the past year. This one surprised me. This one really did surprise me that it works this way, simply because I tie cost to elite schools to alumni who will say certain things. But that's not the case, it would seem, from this slide here.
Yeah, and a lot of people will continue to fight on this one because they just don't want to believe it, right? We want to believe that a more expensive education is a higher quality education. And by all means, there are expensive schools that are doing a great job delivering on quality. But what it also tells us is that there are inexpensive schools delivering on quality and really expensive ones that are not, right? In general, though, it's a wash. There's no strong relationship whatsoever between the cost of a college or university and the alumni ratings that they give it in terms of the quality of their experience. That's a tough one because, you start to undermine one of the big myths of, if it's more expensive, it must be better. That's just not true.
It feels like a very, cars go that way. Like, it's just such a specific thing of, if it costs more, it's got to be better. Well, I think people are becoming better purchasers. They're becoming better customers, more educated on that fact, and we're starting to see that come out. Next one up, 27% of recent graduates report having a good job upon graduation. Sounds like a small percentage to me.
Well, it's interesting. Somebody once said, geez, that actually sounds like a pretty good percentage. So there's a little bit of like the eye of the beholder here. I'll tell you, though, one of the first times I shared this data point was in front of a board of trustees. And I'm not kidding, can't make up this story. One of the board members was so horrified by this stat that he threw up his arms saying, "Are you kidding me? This is horrible." And as he did it, he fell backwards in his chair. So literally fell out of his chair. I have to say, this is an indicator. A lot of colleges like to measure things like, what percent of our grads had a job within 6 months of graduation? They make no effort to actually measure what kind of job that was. Is it a full-time job? Is it a job that makes a decent salary? It's just an indicator. You want to measure the percent of grads who had a job the second they graduated. It's about a quarter. But here's the important thing, right? On the other end of the equation, more than 1 in 5 college graduates took 7 months or longer to find a good job after graduation, including 16% overall who took a year or longer.
Wow.
Those are the unacceptable ends of it, right? So now you say, hey, how can we improve the 27% who had one upon graduation? And the next stat is this: make sure they had an internship during college, right? Like, it is one of the magic ingredients that we do not emphasize enough, because a graduate who had an internship during college, they were twice as likely to have had a good job waiting for them upon graduation. So you want to double the percentage of students graduating with a great job, just make sure internships is a required element of what you're doing with your institution.
That makes a lot of sense. You've had a lot of great guests on talking about internships and the way co-ops work and different things that can set up students for their next steps and what they can do to really make a difference in the future. Looking at this next slide, dive into this one for us. 16% rated their experience with career services as very helpful.
Yeah. So look, historically, career services has not been a kind of powerhouse in terms of delivering on value for students. A lot of institutions, good news, making great progress in improving career services and investing more in it. But if you look at this historically, right, only about half of students, half of all graduates ever took advantage of the career services office in any function. Of those who did, 16% said it was very helpful, which is the same percent who said it was not at all helpful. So lots of room for improvement in the delivery of career services. You take that stat I just talked about, and what it means is that the net effect is 8% of graduates visited career services and left saying it was very helpful. So we've got nowhere to go but up on this indicator, and the reason why it's so important is on the next stat, which is that for the students who did, for the 8% who availed themselves of career services and found it to be very helpful, they're 3 times more likely to strongly agree their education was worth the cost, back to that value equation, right? worth the cost is about having high value career support while you're in college. And they're, by the way, 3 times more likely to donate to their alma mater. So you want to talk about fundraising strategy. One of the most effective things universities can do is invest in strong career services support for students. This is a beautiful cycle of reinvestment into the institution. You invest in them, they come back and invest in you. I can't imagine this not being one of the most important strategies for higher education leaders over the next year and years to come is building their career services function.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm sure many college students don't know this exists. They just don't know that this service exists or even thinking about it till they graduate, and then they feel it's too late to even access it. But the circle of that makes a ton of sense. If my college helps me get a job and helps me get a good paying job, I'm much more likely to be that much, to give the donation, to be somebody who does an annual contribution of some sort, because I feel that much more tied to the school, as it were. Number 19, the importance of quality career services in sport. The current median ratio of students to career services staff is an astronomical number.
1,583 to 1, and I think this just stands on its own, right? If we really want to invest in that reason why Americans value higher education most, to get a good or better job, we got to come back to how well we're supporting students doing that. And I can tell you right now, a 1,583 to 1 ratio ain't going to cut it.
Continuing on here as we go to number 20, 68% of colleges and universities don't provide any stipend for students to pursue low pay or unpaid internships.
And we just talked about how important internships are, right? In terms of doubling the odds that you have a good job waiting for you upon graduation. This says a lot, right? Because we know as an equity and access issue that students who come from underserved communities and don't have access to social capital, and parents who have jobs, right? They have fewer opportunities to access internships. And then when they do, they have fewer paid internships. So to think that universities aren't putting aside funds, going out and finding philanthropists who want to support these kinds of initiatives. I mean, I can't think of something more exciting that I'd want to give money to my alma mater than to support a fund that would support underserved students who can't afford to have an unpaid internship, get an unpaid internship because they are given some sort of stipend. So universities have to step up big time on this front. And quite frankly, Dan, I don't think it has to come from their budgets. I think this is something they'll find donors who will be eagerly supportive of.
And I assume there are many a business out there that could figure out certain partnerships with the university to say, hey, we have these internships available. Maybe we can figure out a small sum of money that can make this work for students who otherwise might not have access to it. As you were just saying, your final point of this 21 stats for 2021 in higher ed and what people should know about seems pretty straightforward when you think about it. The connection you make with a faculty member, someone you trust, someone you think is there for you. Why do you think this is so important?
Well, first of all, any faculty who are out there, right, this is just a powerful reminder of how important you are to the success of students, right? It's not just about thinking about it in the traditional academic classroom setting. It's also about the interactions you have with students, the questions you ask them about what they want to do, what kinds of careers and jobs they're thinking about, how you can help support them in that exploration. And I think, as much as we've talked about how important it is to ramp up career services, I think one of the things that we could run astray with is investing so much in career services without thinking about the need to pull this as a function across all areas of the university. So, for example, do I encourage universities to invest more in the career services function? Definitely. What I also want to see them do is incentivize faculty to play more of a role in this, to think about how they can integrate opportunities to make work integrated learning part of their classroom, right? And for them to be considered part of the very effective and very powerful frontline interacting with students, helping them find and identify better careers. So huge kudos to all the faculty out there. Know that anytime you have a conversation with students about their career, their future, what they're thinking of, you are doing them and your institution an incredible service.
So that's 21 stats for 2021. You can read the Forbes article. The link is below here on LinkedIn. You can, of course, follow Brandon as well on LinkedIn. There's a conversation ongoing about this article therein. But Brandon, taking these as a sum, these 21, how do you want people to take these forward to the conversations you're going to have here on Bold Leaders, but also the conversations they're having at their schools, in their ed tech companies, or wherever they might be digesting what you have here?
Yeah, look, here's the summary. Every college university I know right now is looking to find ways to diversify revenue in mission-driven ways, right? So mission-driven revenue, but diversifying that because a lot of them, most of them are under a lot of financial stress. And I can't think of a more effective strategy to invest in terms of career readiness as an overall strategy, right? Involving career services, involving all the aspects I talked about, like internships, stipend for those internships, long-term projects integrated in the classroom. This is a strategy that is going to be one of the most effective sales pitches for prospective students and parents. And it's also going to lead to that virtuous cycle of not just recruiting more students and growing enrollments by hanging out the fact that your institution does a remarkable job with work readiness, but also, of course, helping more students get better jobs who then donate more to the institution. So when you think about all the headwinds that are in front of college and universities right now, I honestly can't recommend one strategy more in terms of its effectiveness for now and in the future than investing in work readiness strategies for students. So that's, I think, the summary of what this data is telling us.
Brandon, great article. Great listening to you walk through them a little bit more detail here. Don't forget, every Thursday, 2 p.m., right here on LinkedIn, also available on YouTube, also available after the fact in podcast form. Bold Leaders in Learning. Brandon's already started to line up the guest list for this year. We're going to see some great guests come through. I will also encourage, if you're out there watching and you believe you know a bold leader in learning, shoot Brandon a message. Let us know who that person is. Let us know why you think they should be part of this show and part of this community, because it's a growing one. And I think, Brandon, now that I get to say it here on the show, you've done a great job of growing a community around this idea and bringing different voices and different people into the mix here. Any final thoughts before we say so long and let people get back to their Thursdays?
No, well, Dan, thank you. As I said, you've been behind the scenes with me for a whole year. It's great to be able to have a live chat with you here. So I'm glad folks got to see you. And thanks to everybody who has made this an enriching community for me and for one another. We're just going to keep going here. So look forward to seeing you every Thursday at 2 p.m.
Every Thursday, 2 p.m. right here on LinkedIn. Bold Leaders in Learning. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.